Always a pleasure to welcome former NHL netminder Connor Hutton to the show, and I'm going to flip up the order here, Hutz. Let's start with that MVP talk. Hellebuyck is a lock for the Vezina, but what do you make about him being an MVP candidate? Are you one of those guys that thinks goalies should get more love in that race?
I guess maybe you can make the argument for Hellebuyck because he plays so many minutes and he plays a lot of game and he is the most important player for Winnipeg Jets. But at the same time, it's hard when you're a guy that doesn't have an impact on every single game, right? You think about Draisaitl and McKinnon playing every single night. There's no nights off. So I am biased because he is a goalie and he's the best goalie in the world. But I still think it's always going to, bode toward the player because you're playing every single night. And for Hellebuyck, he goes, I think this whole Jets team is only going to go as far as he can take them come playoff time. I think we saw that at the deadline, what they added a little bit of perimeter to their team because I feel like at this point he's going to have to be the difference maker for them.
So let me just quickly wrap up the awards side of our segment here. If Hellebuyck is your lock for number one in the Vezina, I mean, this is a guy who could win the goaltending triple crown. Who else do you have on your ballot?
I think right now it's got to be Logan Thompson, what he's done this year. He's 28-4. He's been great. His numbers have dropped off a little bit as we move forward here at 916. But looking at 28-4 is unbelievable. I think the fact of the matter is I don't really think anyone pegged Washington to be as good as they've been this year. And he's been a big difference maker in that team. I think leaving Vegas, everyone was a little bit unsure of where he was going to go and how it would go. And he's been great and fun to watch. And then the other guy, it's Andrei Vasilevskiy. I think he's put himself back on the map here. He's got 30 wins now, and he's been an absolute workhorse for the Tampa Bay Lightning with a .920 save percentage. And for me, Tampa Bay is that scary team again now. We look at the loaded Atlantic. Nobody wants to have to go down to Florida. We saw the matchup last night between Florida and Toronto, a big loss for Toronto, now looking like you might have to go back and play Tampa Bay in the first round with Andrei Vasilevskiy there and what they've done at the trade deadline to load up. That is a scary team in the East.
Yeah. Andrei Vasilevsky's back to providing teams some nightmare fuel, which is certainly scary when you head into the postseason. Let's talk news of the day, Huts. Adin Hill signs a 6-year extension with the Vegas Golden Knights at $6.25 million. You can see the table that was kind of set by Kevin Lankinen and then Karel Vejmelka. They had 4-year, 5-year deals in the 4.5, 4.75 range. Adin Hill's got the cup. He was north of them in AAV to begin with. Do you like this signing, and how do you think it fits in the marketplace?
I think it's pretty good. Honestly, I think it's pretty good for Vegas, right? I think you're kind of hedging your bet here if you're Vegas, because if he goes on another playoff run and wins another cup or they go really deep in the playoffs, I think the price only goes up. And for a guy like Adin Hill, who wasn't really marked to be a stud, he's kind of come into his own. And I think he's fallen into a good place in Vegas, right? Where they defend very well. He's a career .906 save percentage, or this year, sorry, .909 in over 175 games now, which is really good numbers. But again, I think it's skewed a bit because Vegas is so good defensively. We look at that playoff run, his numbers in the playoff have been very good, but I think this is a hedge your bet here. And I think time will tell, if there's some shrapnel from all these signings that Vegas has had over the last few years. In year 3-4 of this deal, can he still put up those good numbers?
So just off the top of your head, if you were to take the 32 starting goalies, so to speak, in the NHL, where would Hill be in the second 10?
Yeah. Second 10 for sure. I think I could put 10 guys ahead of him right now. Just based on his skill set, right? Frank, he's a big body, takes up a lot of space. He doesn't really wow you. I think if you put Adin Hill in the wrong situation, a team that isn't very defensive and they give up a lot more open ice chances, I think it would be a little more chaotic for him just because his lack of lateral movement. But he is a good goalie. He has the mental awareness, obviously, and capability to win in the playoffs. So I think there's value there. He's the perfect fit for me. And that's why I was surprised we didn't really see a taste of him in Four Nations, because obviously Binnington went with it, but he would have been protected, right? We saw how well they defended. But that being said, it'll be interesting to see how this deal plays out.
Yeah, and still a good deal for Hill, $37 million. And not only that, but you look at the way the pay scale has changed for some of these sort of mid-tier goalies, Joey Decord, I mentioned some of the others, it's a good time to be a mid-tier goalie with the cap going up. Before we were seeing only the top level guys getting paid and the guys toward the mid were getting squeezed into the lower tier. And that's been tough for goalies for a few years now, but it seems like that's back. So speaking of that, let's talk about what the market looks like this summer. Is there a pending UFA as we get closer to July 1 that stands out for you that you would be targeting if you were a team looking for help in net?
You know, it's going to be tricky, right? Because a lot of these guys don't have good numbers. Everybody's sub 900, and a few guys have made a lot of money. Jake Allen is on a really good contract. He signed early with Montreal, and Jake, being a friend of mine, he felt like he was pressured into it because he knew Montreal wasn't going to be good, so he wanted to take that money. I think he's going to have to take a pay cut. I think he still gets a deal. And the interesting one for me would be Ilya Samsonov and Dan Vladar. Those are the two guys that I still think have some upside, and you could probably squeeze them out. I wouldn't be surprised if Samsonov tries to get a deal done earlier with Vegas. Now that Adin Hill is in place, you know, you can kind of get him on a 2 or 3 year deal at like lower money because his numbers aren't great. So he would be the guy that I think, you know, is sought after for Vegas to stay, and then they have their two guys moving forward. And then the other guy is obviously Georgiev. I feel like his game has been a little bit up and down. He's played well as of late for the San Jose Sharks. I think he's going to have to take a pay cut to get somewhere. So this is a weaker market, I would say, comparatively, especially the way that most guys' numbers are.
So then let me ask you about potential bounce back candidates. I know a couple of months ago we had the conversation about both Jari and Grubauer maybe being two guys who could get bought out this summer. Jari's come back from the minors and played 3 really good games for the Penguins. Do you think with the UFA class being what it is, if Jari were to get bought out, where does he slot amongst those guys?
Yeah, I think he'd be right up there if he was bought out, especially a guy that's played. He's just under 300 games played in his career. He's only 29 years old. He's young. He still has a lot of miles on his tires. And for me, the fact of the matter, he's got a .910 save percentage over his career, which is great. But I feel like in Pittsburgh, it's been those lack of the numbers and the way they've come down. But again, in the NHL, if you don't defend well, your goalie has to be superb to really make up for that. Again, another goalie that, Frank, I would probably slot in the lower half of the starters to start the year. But again, I think for me, the biggest problem with Tristan Jarry is like the eye test. His game just doesn't look as groomed as most goalies, right? His post integration, the way he moves. But that being said, he is a puck stopper. And again, I think if you could get him on a defensive team with a good like AAV on his contract, there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, and someone will probably take a peek at a Vitek Vanacek or someone that's also in the UFA category. I think just a reminder that in the goalie market and goalie world, what's down isn't necessarily down forever. I mean, look at Mackenzie Blackwood and how he resuscitated his career, turns it all of a sudden into a $25+ million contract with the Colorado Avalanche. And you go, this is a guy that 18 months ago was on the scrap heap.
It's so true, Frank. And again, I always felt like this when I was in free agency. It's like, it's better the devil you know, right? Like if you're a guy that has a decent rapport and you've been in the league, they'd rather give you a second chance than try to bring someone in. I felt like getting a seat at the table was the most important part. Once you were there, you really had to play real bad to blow it.
Former NHL goaltender Carter Hutton. You can find him on the Bet365 Starting Goalie Show on Daily Faceoff as well. Huts, thanks for popping on.
Hey, thanks, guys.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.